I want to share something with you that's been a shadow in my life longer than I care to admit. This restless, relentless pull of my own mind dragging me away from now, from the moment that's right in front of me. It's like living in two places at once. My body sitting here, but my thoughts racing to the next thing, the next possible disaster, the next unknown I can't control. Have you ever felt that way? Like no matter what's happening around you, your mind refuses to settle anywhere but in the what-if zone. That place where everything feels fragile, unsafe, uncertain. I remember once sitting in a coffee shop, supposedly taking a break from work, but my chest tightened as I scrolled endlessly through emails and reminders of things I hadn't even started. My fingers hovered over the phone, yet my mind was halfway through a conversation that hadn't happened, panicking about what I'd say wrong, how I might mess it up. I caught myself, physically in that seat, breathing the cafe's warm air, hearing the murmur of other people's lives. But mentally, I was sprinting through a maze of what-ifs that never stopped. The present moment, that cup of coffee, the laughter nearby, none of it landed. I wasn't really there. That's the cruel twist anxiety plays on us. It steals the present quietly, without ceremony. It leaves us with this gnawing feeling that we must prepare, anticipate, brace ourselves for a future full of threats we don't even fully understand yet. It's not that we want to live ahead of ourselves. It's that the habit has built a cage around our minds, locking us into a state of constant hypervigilance. We become prisoners of potential problems, rehearsing catastrophes that may never materialize. I never realized how pervasive this was until one evening when I was scrolling through my messages and caught my reflection in the phone's glass. Eyes darting, brows furrowed, a brief flash of panic. It hit me, then that anxiety had painted a veil over my life so thick I couldn't see past it. And what scared me most was knowing that this wasn't the promise of preparation. It was something else entirely. Something that disguised itself as foresight but was actually a relentless, exhausting compulsion. I want to be honest here. This experience isn't about some abstract fear. It's the actual feeling of my mind betraying me, dragging me away from the laughter of a friend, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, or even the simple pleasure of breathing without tension. It's like my mind was always gearing up for a battle that hadn't arrived yet. I wasn't relaxing because my brain wouldn't allow it. I wasn't productive, even though my mind thought it was working hard. I was stuck in a war with a ghost. And maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe your heart races at unexplained moments. Your stomach tightens when there's nothing to fear, or your thoughts run wild with endless scenarios. This is not about avoiding responsibility or lacking ambition. It's not a flaw in your character or a failure of will. It's a subtle, persistent force draining the life out of the minutes that belong to you. What if I told you that living in this constant next moment isn't the same as being productive? That it's something far deeper, a habit that developed to protect you but ended up imprisoning you? And what if reclaiming your life, the real life that happens right here, right now, is not about erasing anxiety, but learning a new way to coexist with it? I want us to walk through this together because I've been there. I know the temptation to chase after the future, to prepare again and again until the present slips through our fingers like sand. But I've also found sparks of light, ways to gently pull my mind back home, to breathe again in the safety of now without denying what anxiety is trying to tell me. This won't be a promise of empty minds or perfect calm. It's a conversation about how to stop being a hostage to the looming what-ifs and start living again amid the swirling thoughts. You can still feel the uncertainty without surrendering to it. And when you do, you open doors to moments you may have believed were lost forever. So, whether your future fears come as endless to-do lists, imagined conversations, or quiet dread in the back of your mind, know this: there is a way forward. A way to find the present that's patiently waiting for you beneath the noise. I want you to think, right now, about the thought that invades your mind the most each day. That future worry that colors everything else. Hold it gently for a moment without judgment. Because whatever it is, it's part of your story, and together, we're going to begin rewriting what comes next. I used to think that constantly sizing up what might happen was a sign of being sharp, of staying one step ahead. But one afternoon, while sitting in a sun-dappled park, watching children chase bubbles that shimmered and vanished, I caught myself trying to predict what clouds would bring or if I'd have enough time to finish everything before evening. The sheer contrast between their carefree play and my restless plodding was undeniable. It was as if my thoughts had become a restless river, rippling endlessly, never allowing me to simply float or rest. What surprised me most wasn't just the ceaseless anticipation, but how this habit began to infiltrate even my quietest hours. At night, instead of peace, I wrestled with shadows cast not by dim streetlights, but by hypothetical calamities. I'd build elaborate scenarios in my head, rehearsing conversations shadowed by worst consequences. Each thought felt like a domino tipping, orchestrating a cascade of fears that left me drained. There wasn't space for stillness, only the white noise of what could go wrong. One evening, while sitting by my window, enveloped in the soothing darkness after a long day, I realized something profound. I wasn't preparing, I was surviving. It wasn't about solving problems or preventing mishaps. It was my mind trying to defend me against unseen enemies. But this defense had become an ambush. The constant state of alert was exhausting, like running on a treadmill that never slowed, no matter how tired I felt. That was the turning point, recognizing that vigilance does not always equal strength. Moreover, anxiety convinced me that resting was a luxury I couldn't afford. Even in the quiet safety of my room, I felt restless, as if my body needed to be on guard despite no real threat. I remember lying still, muscles tense, heart racing, trying desperately to shut off my thoughts. But this effort only intensified the cycle. Trying to silence the storm inside felt like holding back a wave with bare hands. I realized that this struggle wasn't simply mental. It was physical too. Knots in my shoulders, a clenched jaw, shallow breaths. Anxiety's reach extended beyond thinking, invading every fiber of my being. Another layer I uncovered was the fear of facing emotions as they arrived. Instead of allowing feelings to surface naturally, I found myself retreating into projections about the future. It was easier to brace for discomfort that might come than to experience uncertainty in real time. For instance, if I felt sadness or frustration creeping in, my instinct was to distract myself by planning or worrying ahead. That avoidance created an invisible wall between me and my experience. Emotions weren't signals to explore, but threats to dodge. During one reflective walk through autumn leaves crackling beneath my feet, I encountered a metaphor that stuck with me. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with stones, each stone representing a future concern we haul around not because they're immediate burdens, but because we fear what might happen if we don't. Sometimes, I wondered if all that weight was necessary or simply a habit that chained me to suspicion rather than freedom. The realization dawned gently. I could choose which stones to carry and when to set some down. In doing so, I could reclaim a lighter path. Facing these internal patterns has been anything but linear. There were days I slid back into spirals, feeling trapped in a maze with no exit. Yet with each setback, I learned more about how tightly tangled anticipation and fear were within the architecture of my thoughts and body. One striking revelation was how pervasive this tension became during seemingly productive moments. For example, I would confuse relentless worrying about upcoming deadlines with genuine preparation, mistaking busyness for progress. This distorted sense of productivity blurred the line between action and agitation. What added complexity was noticing how vulnerable I felt beneath all this. The constant looking ahead masked a deep uncertainty about handling whatever actually arrived. At times, the burden of imagined crises felt heavier than any real challenge I'd met. It was like preparing for a storm so fierce that I forgot to enjoy the sun when it shone. The irony wasn't lost on me. By attempting to guard against hardship, I was often robbing myself of resilience by never fully engaging with what was already unfolding. Now, consider how this applies when you face a decision that feels overwhelming. You might find yourself running through a parade of what-if scenarios, each more catastrophic than the last, sapping your clarity. I've stood there too, caught in that swirl, paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. But in that freezing stillness lies an invitation, an opening toward discovery. When I allowed myself to notice the tightness in my chest without immediately countering it with future fears, I began to touch something quieter beneath the chaos, a subtle pulse of courage. The transformation started when I acknowledged that this habit of tormenting anticipation wasn't just a mental glitch, but a learned response shaped by survival instincts. Understanding that fear's voice did not always reflect reality enabled me to question it, not with dismissal, but with curiosity. Instead of fueling the fire, I learned to watch the flames flicker with a calm distance. That shift was neither instantaneous nor perfect, yet it planted the seed of freedom, a chance to step beside my anxious thoughts rather than into their relentless chase. By witnessing how anxiety hijacks our capacity to experience life fully, I began to reclaim pieces of myself previously lost to worry's shadow. Recognizing the difference between necessary foresight and obsessive projection remained a challenge, but each time I noticed the difference, I found room to breathe a little easier. The journey isn't about abolishing concern. It's about developing grace with our own instinct to protect while opening space for life's unscripted moments to unfold without resistance. There was a late afternoon when I found myself sitting by a window, the golden light filtering through sheer curtains, casting shifting patterns on the floor. Outside, leaves whispered their quiet goodbyes to summer, swirling in gentle gusts that seemed to carry a message of change. Yet inside me, an unrelenting cyclone of uneasy thoughts churned relentlessly, refusing to still. It was like trying to enjoy a serene moment while your head is filled with static, a storm of projections crashing against your peace. That feeling wasn't unfamiliar, but this time, I decided to examine it from a new vantage point, by tuning into how my body was echoing these rushed mental scenes. I'd always considered my unease as something residing solely in my cognition, but on that day, I noticed tightness coiling around my ribs, a subtle trembling beneath my skin, and a quickness to my breathing I hadn't acknowledged before. Anxiety wasn't just a restless script playing overhead. It was a guest deeply embedded in the temple of my flesh. It reminded me of a violin string stretched taut beyond its breaking point, producing notes that were off-key and harsh. As I sat with those sensations, I realized that often, the relentless tension I felt was less about the thoughts I entertained and more about the physical grip they held on me. Seeking to understand this bodily dialogue, I began exploring how my reactions to uncertainty extended beyond mental loops into the rhythms of my heartbeat and the way my muscles stubbornly clenched during moments that should have been tranquil. I think of one evening when a friend invited me to simply be together in silence. Normally, the idea of quiet would seem inviting, a balm to restless pathways. However, my limbs remained restless, fidgeting with a bracelet, tapping a foot, while my breath stayed shallow. I realized then that calming my racing thoughts wasn't sufficient without first honoring what my body was communicating, a language of unease I had been dismissing. What unfolded from that realization felt like finding a hidden door inside. I started experimenting with practices focused less on controlling mental narratives and more on reconnecting with internal sensations. For instance, I learned to place my hand over my chest, feeling the subtle rise and fall, the warmth spreading beneath my palm. Instead of resisting the jitter within, I invited myself to acknowledge the tremors, the tension, as if greeting an old, challenging friend rather than pushing it away. This shift gradually unraveled some of the rigidity that kept me on edge. One vivid night stands out when I was walking home beneath a sky heavy with stars, cool air caressing my face. In those moments, I intentionally slowed my gait, matching it with deep, steady breaths. The world felt vast yet intimate, a paradox that allowed space for unease without it swallowing me whole. Time seemed to lengthen as I felt the weight of my body grounding me, an anchor amidst swirling uncertainties. It was then that I realized my discomfort had been magnified by abandonment of the physical self. By neglecting that inward pulse, I'd inadvertently allowed anticipation to balloon unchecked. This growing awareness transformed how I approached moments saturated with apprehension. Instead of being hostage to incessant preparation, I began cultivating what felt like a dialogue between my limbs and thoughts. During meetings or gatherings, when anxiety tried to sneak in disguised as efficiency, I'd subtly tap my fingertips or shift posture, tethering myself to sensation rather than abstraction. This small, intentional act created openings, a refuge that wasn't about erasing concerns, but about coexisting with them more gracefully. Another layer emerged when I noticed that tiredness often fed into the whirlwind of future-oriented worry. There were days when exhaustion blurred my judgment, making fears seem more urgent and insurmountable. During one particularly draining week, I caught myself spiraling over an email I hadn't sent, concocting all sorts of plausible disasters. But recognizing that fatigue was clouding my perspective offered a new lever for control. I sat down with a cup of tea, allowed myself a pause, and acknowledged that when the body is weary, the imagination often paints darker shadows. In that moment, self-compassion became a balm more powerful than logic alone. This bodily exploration also led me to appreciate the simple power of rhythm and repetition in soothing anxious waves. Activities like running, dancing, or even drawing repetitive shapes helped anchor me when mental chatter threatened to overwhelm. While the mind wandered restlessly, these actions wove a steady beat beneath the surface, a heartbeat connecting me to something beyond endless anticipation. I recall evenings where signing my name over and over or tracing circles on paper became unexpected sanctuaries, small, grounding rituals that reminded me of my human vulnerability and resilience. Through all of this, conversations blossomed between my inner states and external reality. I began recognizing moments when physical signals presaged mental storms, tight jaw, shallow breath, restless legs, and could intervene early, tuning into my body's wisdom rather than defaulting to anxious projections. This new symbiosis didn't extinguish tension, but softened its grip, making space for curiosity and acceptance. I stopped viewing anxiety as an enemy sneaking in, but started seeing it as a messenger calling me back to deeper presence within myself. Now, consider how this approach might translate in your own life. Perhaps the next time you feel that creeping tension, scan your body gently. Notice what sensations arise: a knot in your stomach, a fluttering in your chest, or a subtle locking in your shoulders. Rather than reacting by racing forward mentally, invite those sensations into your awareness. Speak to them as you would a friend sharing news, not a foe demanding battle. Observe without judgment. This simple act opens a bridge to reconnect with the richness beneath the surface noise and can slowly dissolve the overwhelming surge that so often compels us to escape into imagined scenarios. At times, it takes patience to learn this new bodily language, to sit with discomfort rather than evade it. But when nurtured, it becomes a compass guiding us away from exhaustion and toward equilibrium. In that journey, we reclaim more than moments. We reclaim ourselves. I remember a moment when I was stuck in traffic, the car idling under a heavy gray sky, rain tapping relentlessly against the windshield. At first, I let my mind drift to the usual flood of worries. What if I'm late? What could go wrong? But then my gaze shifted to the droplets racing each other down the glass, merging and trickling unpredictably. Suddenly, I realized that my desire to control every outcome was as futile as trying to stop those droplets from finding their own path. This small observation sparked an idea. What if part of my anxiety stemmed from resisting the natural flow of things, an insistence that the future must be perfectly mapped out? Later on, I began testing this concept in everyday life. An early example came during a meeting where I anticipated needing to offer solutions immediately. My chest tightened as my mind rushed ahead, envisioning objections and challenges from others. Instead of succumbing, I gave myself permission to let thoughts arrive and depart without judgment. I acknowledged my impulse to jump ahead, but chose to listen fully to what was being said, focusing intently on the conversation's rhythm. Though uncomfortable at first, this presence allowed me to engage more authentically and less reactively. I noticed that the pressure to predict and prepare often clouded my ability to respond clearly. This shift opened my eyes to how frequently I confused preparedness with anxiety-driven imagining. Preparing involves grounding ourselves in what's relevant, using past experience to navigate the current moment deftly. Conversely, anxiety spins a web of hypothetical scenarios, many exaggerated or unlikely. One afternoon, while planning a family dinner, I realized how this difference played out even in simple tasks. Instead of focusing on the recipe and enjoying the process, I found myself rehearsing every possible mishap: burning the dish, running out of ingredients, guests arriving too early. Eventually, I asked myself, was this really preparation, or simply a mental loop masking deeper worries? As I experimented further, I discovered that anxiety often masquerades as a kind of false productivity. My mind's incessant hurry gave an illusion that I was tackling problems actively, but in truth, I was spinning in place. One particular instance stands out. Late into a work project, instead of advancing steadily, I chased down hypothetical issues that might arise if circumstances shifted. Hours passed with little real progress. When I finally paused, the contrast between frantic thought and true accomplishment felt stark. The realization settled that my anxious momentum drained energy from meaningful action. An intriguing breakthrough occurred when I noticed how my attachment to outcomes fueled my mental acceleration. I'd fixate on a particular result, unwilling to embrace anything less than perfect. One Saturday, while attempting to write a heartfelt letter to a friend, I felt this internal clamp tightening. Rejecting drafts over and over because they didn't meet an imagined ideal, I stalled entirely. Sitting with this frustration, I asked myself if my anxiety was really about the letter or about fear of falling short altogether. In that moment, vulnerability surfaced. This relentless craving for certainty was a shield against potential disappointment. Acknowledging this softened the hold it had on me. This awareness transformed the way I viewed uncertainty itself. I began cultivating a mindset that honored unpredictability as a natural companion in life's journey. An example that remains vivid is a weekend hike I took, stepping onto trails shrouded in mist. Without a clear path or defined destination, I had to surrender control, trusting the terrain and my own feet. With each cautious step, I felt a restrained tension loosen gradually. The forest's unpredictability became a mirror for my inner landscape, teaching me to sit with not knowing instead of battling it. This experience planted seeds of resilience that extended into daily routine. In practicing this new relationship with uncertainty, my emotional responses softened too. Instead of meeting every unknown with alarm or defense, I started inviting curiosity and self-compassion. Once, while preparing an important presentation, waves of dread surged unexpectedly. Rather than attempting to suppress these feelings, I named them, acknowledging their presence as natural signals rather than threats. Whispering gently to myself, "It's okay to feel this right now," created a subtle shift in tone that quieted internal chaos and opened space for confidence to rise. Building on these moments, I turned my attention toward recognizing early warning signs of spiraling anticipation. It became clear that certain triggers, like ambiguous instructions at work or vague social invitations, sparked cascade reactions. By sharpening my awareness, I equipped myself to pause, breathe, and reset before becoming entangled in hypotheticals. This proactive stance wasn't about eliminating anxiety, but managing its intensity with grace. Over time, these small interventions accumulated, changing the rhythm of my inner dialogue from relentless plotting to measured reflection. Now, imagine how this approach could transform your experience when faced with tasks or relationships that provoke unease. Instead of diving headfirst into a torrent of possible outcomes, consider adopting a beginner's mindset, one that observes thoughts without necessarily buying into them. Pause to identify what is within your influence and what lies beyond it. By gently steering your mental energy toward what you can engage with authentically, you reclaim agency often lost in fearful anticipation. This subtle recalibration can shift the texture of your days, allowing moments of calm and clarity to surface even amid uncertainty. Through these shifts, I came to appreciate that anxious projection often thrives in the gap between expectation and acceptance. By closing that gap with mindful attention, self-kindness, and purposeful engagement, I found a freeing space where the relentless, "what could happen," lost much of its power. This journey didn't mean a disappearance of worry, but a growing ability to live alongside it without surrendering to its demands. And that, I believe, is the true work of finding balance amid an uncertain world. One afternoon, a close friend invited me to join her for a pottery class, a medium neither of us had explored before. Walking into that studio, I immediately sensed a clash between my usual restlessness and the patience the craft demanded. As I wedged the clay and guided it on the spinning wheel, a strange tension emerged inside me. My hands wanted to rush, to control the shape with urgency, but the clay resisted, reminding me that some things unfold only with quiet persistence. In that tactile encounter, I encountered a new frontier in confronting my anxiety, surrendering to process rather than chasing outcomes. This experience revealed something unexpected: the connection between creativity and anxious anticipation. I realized that anxiety often pulls me away from engaging fully with what I am creating, be it a thought, a conversation, or even a relationship, because it's preoccupied with projections. The pottery wheel, spinning steadily beneath my fingers, became a metaphor for the rhythm of presence that anxiety disrupts. The clay could not be forced. It required trust and attention in each rotation. For the first time in a long while, I found myself tethered not to what I feared might come, but to what my senses were inviting me to explore: texture, temperature, shape. This shift was subtle but profound. Following that lesson, I noticed new patterns revealing themselves in everyday interactions. Take, for example, my conversations with colleagues. Often, I caught my mind leaping ahead, preparing responses to unspoken critiques or potential misunderstandings. Yet, with greater awareness drawn from that creative struggle, I could practice listening attentively, allowing words to land completely before reacting. When I asked questions or clarified points without hurry, the dialogue deepened, transforming from a battleground of imagined defenses to a genuine exchange. These moments taught me that anxiety's tug to anticipate and control often dims the vibrancy of connection. On one brisk autumn evening, I stood by the riverside near my apartment, watching shadows lengthen as the current carried leaves downstream. The water's movement was relentless yet fluid, indifferent to my anxious forecasts. I felt a kinship with that flow, a reminder that life's trajectory doesn't pause to accommodate my inner turmoil. Engaging with that metaphor, I began cultivating rituals focused on rhythm and flow, such as mindful walking or timed breathing exercises. These embodied practices invited me to inhabit my body more fully, anchoring attention in sensation instead of mental loops. Another unexpected doorway opened when I started journaling, not to analyze anxiety directly, but simply to capture moments of ordinary awareness. One entry described early morning light filtering through curtains, the sounds of distant birds, and the scent of brewing coffee. Focusing on sensory details brought a refreshing clarity, a contrast to stories my mind spun in anticipation. Writing became a grounding act, not in escaping emotions, but embracing experience's texture without immediate judgment. Over time, these entries formed a patchwork of moments reclaimed from distraction, quietly building resilience. While exploring these strategies, I recognized a paradox. Excessive planning under anxiety's influence doesn't generate security, it breeds dissonance. This was evident during preparations for a family gathering where my mind oscillated between assembling perfect schedules and rehearsing conversations. The more I tried to script every moment, the more fragmented my focus became. Yet, letting go of rigid plans, while seemingly risky, opened unexpected joy. Inviting spontaneity in that context felt like breathing fresh air into stifled rooms within me, revealing that presence isn't a static achievement, but a dynamic practice. Perhaps one of the most challenging revelations unfolded when I confronted moments of boredom or idleness, times when distraction wasn't instantly available. Initially, these pauses provoked discomfort, a gnawing urge to escape through mental replay of future scenarios. Yet, gradually, sitting with stillness became a conduit for witnessing the restless impulses without amplifying them. I imagined my thoughts as waves on a vast ocean, sometimes towering, sometimes calm, but always transient. Acknowledging that waves do not define the ocean introduced compassion towards my own unpredictability. A striking conversation with my younger sibling also shaped this evolving perspective. They shared how stepping outside for brief moments of silent observation, watching clouds, feeling the breeze, helped dissipate their racing mind. Inspired, I began incorporating similar pauses into daily routine. On one occasion, waiting in a grocery line, I shifted attention to noticing the texture of the floor tiles beneath my shoes and the hum of voices around me. That simple recalibration brought an immediate relief, peeling away noise without needing to analyze or fix anything. Now, Consider how embracing unpredictability and process as companions rather than adversaries could transform your own moments of unease. What if your energy shifted from wrestling with imagined scenarios to engaging actively with your senses and surroundings? This approach doesn't promise an absence of apprehension, but offers an invitation to deepen your relationship with whatever arises, enriching your experience. It creates openings to connect meaningfully with yourself and others without the constant pressure of anticipating disruptions. These transformations invite a reimagining of productivity, too. Instead of gauging effectiveness by how many future problems I've mentally solved, I began recognizing progress in the quality of attention and openness I bring to now. This subtle but profound change reframes my relationship with time and self, fostering a rhythm where growth stems from curiosity and acceptance rather than urgency or avoidance. Such shifts may seem small at first, but their cumulative effect creates a sturdier foundation on which to build a calmer, more engaged life. The first time I truly confronted my compulsive, future-focused mind was during a solo camping trip deep in the mountains. The sky was a tapestry of stars, scattered like spilled diamonds across the inky blackness, and the cool night air whispered through the pine needles above. I sat by the flickering fire, my thoughts looping through endless scenarios of what might unfold once I returned home. Work emergencies, family conflicts, health worries, all narratives spinning out of control. Yet the forest around me was remarkably still, untouched by any of these imagined storms. It dawned on me that the relentless anxiety gnawing at my edges was not anchored in the present, but drifting far ahead, beyond any real reach. A quiet voice inside nudged me to experiment. What would happen if, instead of chasing those far-off possibilities, I focused on the immediate? I tried something simple yet revolutionary in my mind. I tuned into the sound of logs cracking, the sharp scent of pine resin, the crisp chill against my skin. Soon, my pulse slowed, breaths deepened, and the tension that had tightened my chest started peeling away. In those moments, the shackles of future projections loosened their grip, revealing a layer of calm I hadn't known dwell beneath. This experience etched in me a profound lesson. Presence isn't about silence or the absence of thought. It's about redirecting mental energy to what actually occupies my senses, grounding me in tangible reality. While my brain still brewed various what-ifs, they no longer dominated but became mere ripples in a vast, steady lake. The mountain night granted me permission to witness my mind's tendencies without surrender or self-criticism. The true test came the next morning when rain began spattering my tent, turning the landscape sodden and gray. My first impulse was to plot escape routes, forecasts of ruined plans, and logistical nightmares flooding in. But recalling the previous night, I chose instead to observe the rhythm of the raindrops, the patterns of their dance on leaves and earth. The downpour, unpredictable and vibrant, resisted my desire for control and invited acceptance. Slowly, acceptance turned to appreciation. The rain was neither adversary nor inconvenience, but a living pulse in the ecosystem, part of a cycle far bigger than my fretful mind. Within this surrendering, I felt something unexpected emerge: resilience. I sensed that acknowledging uncertainty openly, even welcoming it, endowed me with strength greater than any frantic strategizing could provide. The act of abiding, not conquering, felt like planting roots that quietly held firm amidst shifting winds. This did not erase nervous currents beneath my skin, but offered a steadying net beneath those waves. I began to notice this principle weaving through other moments. When conversations veered into unpredictability, when deadlines shifted abruptly, when relationships revealed unexpected challenges. Approaching such instances with a softer grip, as though cradling a fragile bird rather than wrestling a wild beast, transformed tension into curious engagement. The urgency to anticipate catastrophes diminished as I trusted in my capacity to navigate whatever actually unfolded, moment by moment. One vivid occasion unfolded during an impromptu visit to a crowded marketplace. The hubbub, the cacophony of voices, the scents and colors, all could have been overwhelming triggers for my future-obsessed mind. Usually, I'd brace myself for potential disasters, losing something, getting caught in a rush, making a social faux pas. But that day, Anchoring myself in the sensory mosaic, I let the present wash over me. The warm crush of bodies, the spicy aroma of street food, the kaleidoscope of fabrics flapping in the breeze, all anchored my attention firmly in now. The future faded to a shadowed corner, no longer commanding the stage. Later, reflecting on this shift, I understood an essential truth. The practice of drawing back from future obsession demands wrestling not only with thoughts, but with identity. Our conceptions of who we are when not driven by worry and certitude. Old habits had convinced me that vigilance was intrinsic to my worth, that ceaseless mental loops equaled productivity and care. Yet relinquishing that illusion revealed a deeper, quieter confidence, not born from control, but from trust in self and unfolding life. This meant embracing vulnerability in its rawest form, the admission that some things are unknowable and beyond manipulation. I had to let go of the illusion that my mind must always be one step ahead to protect me. It required courage to face moments when answers were absent, when outcomes uncertain, and simply to exist within that not knowing. It was neither instantaneous nor painless. Often, waves of doubt surged, questioning whether I was abandoning responsibility. But gradually, with patience and gentle resolve, I recognized those admissions as gateways, not failures. Each breath taken in awareness of present experience expanded my capacity to withstand ambiguity. The future, once a looming tyrant, softened into an unfolding mystery I could approach with openness instead of dread. Now, consider how this applies when your thoughts pull you into tomorrow's imagined crises. The tense tightness in your chest, the rapid-fire scenarios playing out like a cinematic trailer in your mind. What if, in those moments, you could pivot your awareness to the immediate, the sound of your own breath, the texture beneath your fingertips, the rhythm of a nearby voice? What could emerge if you practiced this redirection not as a task to conquer discomfort, but as an invitation to reclaim your place in the unfolding moment? The mountain taught me that presence is a muscle, built one intentional pivot at a time, and with each one, the tyranny of the relentless future may lose its power to consume you. As I sit with these reflections, I notice a subtle transformation unfolding within me, like a delicate weaving of threads, each one carrying a different texture of awareness, tension, and release. There's an invisible tide pulling me away from rushing currents toward a gentler current coursing beneath everything. It's not a sudden shift or a dramatic revelation, but an invitation whispered quietly, asking me to lean in and recognize the contours of my own experience with renewed clarity. The restless energy that once dictated my every thought now softens its grasp, revealing a landscape that has always existed beneath the noise, waiting patiently for attention. I recall a moment when I paused beneath an old oak tree whose sprawling branches seemed to hold the sky itself, leaves murmuring secrets in a language older than words. In that stillness, I sensed the tension I'd carried unraveling, not because it vanished, but because I stopped struggling against it and allowed myself to be held by something larger than my anxious mind. There was a kind of grace in receiving each sensation and thought as it arose, welcoming the unpredictability of inner life without demanding immediate answers or solutions. It struck me that existence is made up of countless fleeting instants, each with its own invitation to engage, resist, or surrender. This gradual unfolding feels akin to walking through a dense forest at dawn, when shadows lengthen and light wavers between concealment and revelation. The path isn't always clear, and sometimes I stumble over tangled roots or slip on moist leaves. Yet there's beauty in the uncertainty, an openness that encourages me to trust not only my footing, but also my intuition, that quiet voice that guides without command. Even in moments of hesitation or doubt, I find that the very act of moving forward grounds me more deeply in what is real and alive beneath the swirl of racing thoughts. In conversations with others who have navigated similar inner landscapes, I often hear echoes of this experience, a shared sense of grappling with invisible currents that tug relentlessly, paired with glimpses of freedom glimpsed through unexpected cracks. There's an unspoken understanding that what we face is both intimate and universal, a challenge woven into human consciousness itself. This connection offers a subtle yet profound reassurance. We are not isolated captives of our minds, but fellow travelers discovering, through trial and grace, the contours of resilience and presence. When the mind doesn't demand total control, it opens doors to nuances that were once overshadowed. Emotions, once hurriedly pushed aside or feared, gain room to breathe and express themselves. Moments that might have passed unnoticed invite deeper recognition, becoming subtle anchors in an often turbulent sea. I find myself drawn to this intricate dance between surrender and engagement, a balancing act where effort is tempered by patience and strength reveals itself in softness. It is here, within this dynamic tension, that transformation begins to bloom. Reflecting on the path I have traversed, it feels less like conquering a battle and more like learning to waltz with an old, unpredictable partner. Sometimes the rhythm falters, steps feel uncertain, yet the music persists, inviting me into deeper attunement and harmony. There is a growing sense that life's fullest expression arises not from resisting the whirling currents, but from embracing them, moving in concert with the waves instead of against them. This subtle shift unfolds beneath the surface of awareness, gentle but persistent, expanding the boundaries of what I once believed possible. As I guide myself forward, I sense a gathering momentum, not one fueled by frantic urgency, but a quiet confidence born from repeated practice and compassionate presence. The restless impulse to chase illusions of control softens, replaced by a grounded steadiness that welcomes both certainty and mystery. This steady unfolding reminds me that we are more than our fleeting fears and endless anticipations. We are beings capable of deep transformation, weaving new narratives of freedom and belonging from threads of vulnerability and courage. There is an undeniable poignancy in recognizing that the journey inward is not linear or tidy. It unfolds in loops and circles, small awakenings followed by moments of retreat. I listen to the murmur of my own heart, learning to trust its rhythm as a guide through shifting landscapes of uncertainty. And in listening, truly listening, I find a growing invitation to engage fully with life's unfolding mosaic, embracing complexity without being consumed by it. This moment, this breath, this sensation, each contains a doorway to something beyond anxious anticipation, an opening into a reality richer and more textured than mere survival. The weight of chains forged by mental unrest begins to loosen, revealing capacities for presence, patience, and grace that have always lain beneath the surface. It is here that I stand, poised on the edge of a new understanding, ready to step through into the wider world with an open heart and steady gaze. I once sat on a weathered bench at the edge of a quiet lake just as twilight settled in. Around me, the world hushed, colors melting into one another with seamless grace. Although my body rested, my mind was still adrift on a restless sea of what could be. But something in that delicate moment, perhaps the cool air against my skin or the gentle lapping of water, started to unravel the constant vibration inside me. It wasn't a forceful shift, more a soft invitation to lean into what was unfolding, to notice the subtle language of just being. In that space, I glimpsed an old truth. Life does not ask me to carry every possible burden of the future at once. Instead, it whispers for me to trust each moment, stepping forward one breath, one sensation at a time. I realized we often mistake vigilance for strength, wearing our worries as badges of responsibility. Yet the heart knows a different rhythm, one that embraces uncertainty without erasing our capacity to feel alive. Sometimes, I imagine anxiety not as an enemy, but as a signal from a part of me desperate to be heard, misunderstood, but ultimately guiding me toward deeper awareness. In learning to listen, I discovered that fear's grip loosens, and with it comes a renewed capacity to dwell in openness. It's not about perfect control, but about cultivating a delicate balance between action and surrender, a dance that flows like water, finding crevices and bends rather than smashing obstacles head-on. There was a moment on a rain-kissed morning when I stepped outside, clouds swollen with moisture, footsteps muffled by wet earth. Instead of hurrying forward, I paused and noticed droplets gathering on leaves, the richness of scent rising from the soil, a quiet hum beneath the sky's gray cloak. In that deliberate stillness, I felt a growing clarity. Anxiety's pull is strongest when we resist life's inherent unpredictability. To move gracefully through uncertainty requires a willingness to inhabit discomfort without retreating into imagined futures. It was as if the world was offering a mirror, reflecting back the peace I sought but had long evaded. What struck me most is how often I confuse preparation with projection, mistaking frenetic mental activity for meaningful progress. We live in a culture that lauds constant busyness and preemptive problem-solving, yet genuine growth flows when we slow, tune inward, and discern between what demands our attention and what can be released. The most profound transformation came when I stopped chasing hypothetical crises and began tending to what was real and immediate. The quickening pulse, the embracing warmth of sun after rain, the gentle cadence of conversation without agenda or judgment. It wasn't easy to shift gears. I recall nights when shadows of doubt crept long, twisting thoughts into labyrinths of fear. But even in those moments, I started to cultivate a quieter dialogue with myself, a compassionate acknowledgement rather than harsh resistance. I learned to welcome fragility and imperfection, to recognize that the tension itself could be a doorway, not an endpoint. Through repeated acts of patience and presence, I began to rebuild a foundation rooted not in certainty, but in trust. A trust that, however tangled thoughts may become, I possess the resilience and clarity to navigate what comes. Imagine carrying this sense of trust with you during the day's challenges. When worries crowd your mind and the weight of unknowns threatens to overwhelm, remind yourself that it is not weakness to encounter life unfold unpredictably. Instead, it is a profound expression of humanity to stand open amid the ever-shifting landscape, grounded by moments as they arrive. The future, with all its possibilities, need not be a storm to weather in advance, but a horizon to move toward with gentle readiness. I invite you to explore these pauses, the subtle shifts when your breath deepens, when the world's textures draw your attention, when stillness breaks through static. These fragments of awareness can become anchors, weaving a subtle safety net supporting you through unstable terrain. In so doing, we reclaim the ability to engage fully with life's richness, moving beyond mere endurance into a thriving relationship with ourselves and the world. In the end, the story we live is not defined by escaping apprehension, but by embracing the fullness of experience, finding wholeness within vulnerability, courage within uncertainty. It's a song sung softly through the storms, a light flickering steadfast despite the winds. As I walk this path, I carry a gentle hope that we each can learn to meet our restless minds with kindness, to ease the clutch of fear, and step forward into life's unfolding mystery with an open heart and steady breath.